Let's see. Hello again, everyone. I'm just putting in this area because it has nice music, so we can just listen to that while I do my thing. And that thing is going to be my presentation on Kirbo lore. Yes. Because I don't know if you noticed, but I am a horribly horrible nerd. So yes, this is my presentation, my lecture, if you will, on Kirby lore. I feel anxious. I feel anxious, but hope you guys enjoy it. So basically, I'm not explaining all of Kirby lore. No, we'd be here another 3 hours if I did that. But what I am going to do is explain, all the lore related to this particular game. That's what I'm going to do. So I hope you all enjoy it. Today I'll be covering the lore and connections in Kirby Triple Deluxe. Pretty simple, but yeah, that's what we're doing. Covering all the lore of the game and related and tied to the game because it's a surprising amount of connections. It starts, of course, with the beginning of the game with Kirby being asleep. Should I take notes to be a test? There won't be a test or anything, no, you're fine. But, anyway. So Kirby has a long day doing just things in Dreamland. If you remember the intro, he was fishing, just relaxing, that sort of thing, and he's going for and have a nice little sleep after that. But as he's sleeping, a mysterious vine starts creeping over his window. And before he knows it, I actually named it wrong here, hold on. Stupid me. There we go, Dream Stalk. Anyway, it turns out it's the magical dream stalk which grows around his home and lifts it into the sky, like unearths the entire building and lifts it up. And by the time he wakes up, his home of Dreamland is far below the clouds and he is in the stratosphere, basically. So he starts moving around the vines, and as he goes, he sees Dedede's castle, so he heads there. It turns out this little fellow was also ahead of him. This is Taranza, who I'll talk a bit more as we go on, but basically, he's here to kidnap Dedede. He attacks and kidnaps Dedede, flying off with him in tow, and Kirby naturally chases him up the Dreamstalk, with Taranza trying to stop him with his magic. Not by fighting him directly, as you may expect, but instead empowering whatever happens to be on hand. Like the first time they run, there's a flower, he shoots it, it grows into flowery woods, and they have a fight. Second time, they run into a magical painting, and he just sort of... I didn't really shoot it or anything, it just sort of pulls it up out of somewhere in the area with his magic, and he just puts it in front of Kirby, and it just pops out on its own. Maybe he just could sense the malice from it. Let's see, the third one was the Coolie Rattler, so he basically enchanted a statue to come to life, or maybe activated it, basically, since it seems machine-like. What was the fourth one again? Kracko, right, Kracko. He just summoned Kracko, I suppose. And then there was the frog, Pyribbit, which he actually didn't do anything to summon that one. It was just sort of there. Anyway, I only talk about Paintra of that bunch because she's the one with actual lore aside from what you see in the game. Like the Coolie Rattler, Pyribbit, they just exist. Kracko is Kracko. He doesn't really have lore so much as a vendetta. But Paintra is a little different. The only one I can really talk about is Paintra because she's a living painting with art powers who is remarkably similar to another enemy Kirby fought once. Which you may remember if you've ever seen me do Canvas Curse, but that was a long while ago, so I would not be surprised if you haven't. I don't have any particular intention to revisit that one either. I like it in principle, I like Drawcia in principle, but the game was not fun for me, probably because I didn't have a stylus. But she also has a sister, Drawcia, and I tried to remove this red text, but apparently it just refuses to do for some reason, so we're stuck with that. Anyway, according to the text in the game, it says there was once a painting said to depict a pair of sisters separated at birth. It slept unnoticed in a painter's studio for countless years for Kane a life and vowed revenge on the world. So, Taranza showed up and woke up the painting, and she decided to take revenge on the world, in particular Kirby, who happens to be right in front of her. And now maybe why Drawcia did what she did, but it's difficult to say, because it's not like we have a chance to talk to them. But they are sisters, and they are from the same painting, so from that logic, it's likely they have the same rationales as well. Drawcia, though, is the villain of Kirby Canvas Curse, where she used her magical paintbrush to transform the entire planet into paint, so she could just reshape it however she wanted. She also turned Kirby into a ball, meaning she removed his limbs, so he can't actually interfere and do his usual things. Both help her with Cindy a paintbrush, drawing paths so Kirby can move along and stuff. Kirby had still defeated Drawcia in the end, and saved Dreamland. So that's all I do to cover that, really. But basically, Paintra sort of calls back to Drawcia, and they're apparently sisters, so that's pretty cool. They also both have a knack for laughing maniacally as they fight you, which may imply they're, like, crazy or something? I don't know. I did hear an interesting theory about the two, that or rather about Drawcia, that first she got been painted by Adelines and she can bring things to life with her paintings. And she was possessed by dark matter once, so hey, maybe that's why she made an evil painting lady, but that's just speculation, we don't know. However, she does have a lot of resemblances to dark matter, like that yellow eye in her chest or whatever, which sort of calls back to it a little bit, so hey, that's something. I can see why one would come to that assumption at least. That's all for the bosses before the end of the game though, so I'm just gonna move on. We move on to the last area of the game, called Royal Road, where Taranza has taken Dedede to the home of his queen, Sectonia. It's Sectonia's vast castle complex in the sky, and you may notice that while it is a giant castle, a very big area, as big as the other lands Kirby has been through, who are all natural land masses, this one's just a giant castle, but her actual throne castle thing is actually floating higher above the rest of the castle on its own tower, being silhouetted by the moon for extra beauty points. But I just think it's noteworthy that she has a giant castle, and she has a second backup castle or whatever behind that one. That's just neat. Anyway. So when you go into the first level, you go through the castle gates with the warp star and just smash straight through them, which shows how she's one of the places well barred and defended from any interlopers and such. I also point out that that Sectonia's banner is right above the cannons firing at you, which happen to prominently show her face, so you don't know who she is yet. But it's just letting you know that whoever this person is important. Also, most of the normal enemies here are replaced with insect versions, like, I think they're called the Sectradews. Like, instead of Wilders, you have Sectradews, which are basically their own personal army, so most of the regular enemies are replaced with them, which is pretty neat. And once you get past all the other levels, you come to the final one, where you have the actual floating island where a castle's on, which seems to be a giant prison complex made of crystal. And the people of the sky, those flower people you saw from the game, seem to be imprisoned here, so this seems to be some sort of huge prison for enemies. And even her prison, in fact especially a prison, is just absurdly shiny and covered in gems, or maybe it is a giant gem, I honestly have no idea. But either way, it's meant to be gaudy, eye-popping, and noticeable, since beauty is her obsession after all. And I was thinking about, you know, you might figure for the Arya that live below her in the castle and everything, or whatever citizen she may have, it'd probably be pretty terrifying to have a giant gem-studded prison just levitating over them constantly. Like, it's pretty. It's very nice against the moon and everything, I imagine it's a beautiful sight, but also it's a sign that she's always there, above you, watching, just in case you do something she doesn't like. So that's a little spooky when you think about it. And on top of the actual prison is Sectonia's tower, where her throne is. I like how it's sort of growing out of the crystal, and the pointy bit on the top looks kind of like a crystal as well, so it implies she like grew out of it or something. So yeah, it keeps her prison in direct watch while also flaunting her wealth and power and such, and it's framed by the moon, as I point out, for extra points, just to look prettier. And since she calls herself the Queen of the Heavens, and the Ruler of the Heavens, she points out in that particular cutscene I clipped there, you can see that she kind of positioned herself there for a reason, to denote that she's above everyone else. I also add some director's notes and lore and stuff, something the director of the game apparently said. Now we're going to hear more from the director about Level 6 Royal Road. Hi, now it's more than a year since the release of Kirby Triple Deluxe, so I'm guessing there's plenty of you gotten that final level by now, so it should be safe to talk about it. I'm glad they are careful about spoilers. The entire floating island of Royal Road is covered in palatial buildings, to the point the whole mass resembles a giant castle. So it's not literally a castle, but it resembles one. It's probably like an actual city. On it there lives a race of sweet, good-natured flower people along with intelligent and slightly greedy species of insect. Our story begins when one prominent insect clan abandons the idea of peaceful coexistence that comes to its obsession with beauty and desire for control. So basically, Sectonia wasn't always the queen of their people, she was just the ruler of one clan who then descended into greed and desire to control everything, and that's how we got here. He also says the warp holes in level 6, the ones that teleport you around, are connected to various islands that are probably put in place by a final boss who controls Royal Road, in order to forward the campaign for control of the land below and the countries beyond. No doubt this is why the Sectodes, the insectoid foot soldiers, are already there and Kirby backtracks to their islands during certain stages of Royal Road. I didn't think about it at the time, but yeah, he does teleport back to those areas temporarily and then back again, and you see the Sector enemies there instead. So the implication is they're using the portals to start taking over the areas you've already been through. And about it, Kirby's going to catch up with Taranza through the adventure, surely because Taranza is also taking advantage of magical warp holes. So yeah, Taranza had some shortcuts you didn't, and even then Kirby nearly caught up with him like 5 times. But once you get past the actual city, the prison, and inside a tower, you come to this fancy door I felt I should point out. Big fancy doors, big gears that turn the door when you open it. And she even has stained glasses in her own image, just in case you didn't get the idea of who's in charge. I also know that when the door opens, there's this pretty light that shines through the windows and everything. This is very, ethereal and stuff. It's very nice. You know, just more splendor and grandeur. Now we come to Taranza, who of course is behind that door. He's Sectonia's right-hand man who cannot Dedede, assuming he was the hero called to stop him. I forgot to point this out specifically while I was writing, but basically, the reason that giant dream sprout started growing is because the flower people who live in Sectonia City sought someone to help them, you know, out of their situation. So they shot down a seed from the sky, which landed and grew into that dream stalk. And we're hoping it would call the hero from Dreamland to help them. Now, Sectonia saw this happen and sent some Taranza to find this hero and catch them before they could interfere with their plans. But the thing is, Taranza assumed Dedede was the hero in question, not Kirby. In fact, he completely ignored Kirby while he was down there, to notice. Like, he must have seen while he was flying out, but he didn't care until Kirby was actually following him, and he only seemed to realize that when he gets to the Flowery Woods part, so he didn't even realize he was being followed that entire time. Anyway, Taranza is a bit odd because you never actually fight him directly. And he seems to specialize in binding and controlling magic, which is very Spider-like of him because, you know, spider webs and such. He cannot Dedede because he thought... I already said this. Well, I really should remember what's on my slides. Taranza cannot Dedede because he thought he was the hero the flower people called upon. Kirby was right there. Taranza ignored him, and he assumed the king was the strongest person, like how Sectonia is stronger than himself. I've also heard some speculation it's because Sectonia used to be a good person, a hero to her people, perhaps. So he'd logically assume the same of King Dedede. Plus, it kind of comes in the same sort of territory. That he's the strongest one around, and possibly their hero. That would make sense, logically, that he's also in charge, then I guess. But anyway, that's why he didn't go after Kirby. And Taranza has seen Kirby deal with every boss he's unleashed upon him, animated statues and powered flowers and sealed paintings and one very angry frog, but he assumes Dedede must still be stronger than him, which is why he sicks him on him. Basically, he does one last bit of manipulation, makes Dedede go nuts and attack him, and that's that, but unfortunately it doesn't work for him. He underestimated Kirby, realized Kirby is a hero he's supposed to stop, and tried to call Sectonia to help, realizing he's completely outmatched. So he summons Sectonia also to sort of bail him out here. But that doesn't go great for him. He trusted Sectonia to save him because they used to be friends, but instead she just shot him out of the castle, which blasted him straight out of the sky, presumably just to kill him. As she said herself, she has no use for a fool who can't follow orders, so that was basically an attempted execution, which took him completely blindsided him, really. Like, he assumed they're still friends as they used to be, but she clearly doesn't see it that way. Now we have a bit of lore about Sectonia from the battle with Queen Sectonia DX. It says they are good friends, but she became obsessed with vanity and delusions of grandeur. It wasn't long before her heart went evil, turned to a power-hungry monarch she is today. Apparently, Taranza didn't notice any of that, but, you know, they were friends. He was the closest person to her. You could say maybe he was just blind to her faults and didn't realize what's going on. But we also have this director's note. Queen Sectonia is a mistress of manipulative magic, like Taranza is. They both, basically it's sort of magic they share, and once upon a time she looked similar to her insectoid underlings, but her current beautiful but deadly bee-like form is a body she took over for the use of her magic. I wonder how the minions who knew her before felt, serving a mistress who changes her appearance like that. I think stopping and letting to sit on the throne and go as far as this card one's true form is a trait that makes a true final boss. You know, the Kirby bosses do change their forms a lot, so that is kind of a good point. But anyway, basically she used to be the same species as Taranza, but then she decided this bee-looking body was better looking and presumably stronger or whatever, so she just possessed that person, whoever that was. And he calls attention to the fact that, you know, I wonder what her underlings were thinking when they saw she just completely stole someone else's body. Like, I'd imagine they were terrified. It doesn't hurt that she's much taller than them now. Like, assuming she was Taranza's size, she's more than doubled in height. Plus she's floating and everything. But yeah, Taranza apparently didn't seem to mind as much. Maybe, I don't know, he's probably just desperate to think that she was still a good person deep down. Or maybe that bee deserved it, I don't know. Either way, he has a lot of blind spots where she's concerned, that's for sure. Now, this is where I talk into how she changed, because she, like I said, she used to be a good person. How she changed from a good friend to Taranza, a selfish queen now? It seems a certain mirror is to blame. And then I go into the history of the mirror, which is a bit long, goes into another game, but hey, that's what the whole point of this is for. And here's some of our director's note. Another reason the dimensional mirror shows its key role displayed in the previous post and ended up decorating the Queen Sectonia's chambers, the mirror goes hand in hand with the idea of beauty. Hand mirrors and vanity mirrors and all that, but how'd she actually get her hands on the mirror? Well, her underling Taranza stole it from the mirror world and gave it as tribute to his beauty-obsessed queen. Sadly, as gazing in the mirror day after day, it let her mind be twisted toward tyranny by its power. So yeah, basically this mirror is magical and leads into a mirror world. And from Amazing Mirror, there was lots of shadowy versions of our characters, like for instance Shadow Kirby or Dark Meta Knight, who you saw in this game. And if it's anything like that, then she'd certainly have her worst tendencies reflected back on her. And if she looked at it day after day and used it constantly, then that could distort her mind, yeah. Why was the mirror called this in the first place? Dimensional Mirror is a relic from the Amazing Mirror game, where Kirby entered a mirror world through it and fought a shadowy force to conquer Dreamland. It acts a portal from one world to the other. Sensing the threat coming from the mirror world at the time, Meta Knight flew off to stop it, but there he met a dark copy of himself and Dark Meta Knight defeated him, attacking Kirby as well, and then flew off to the mirror world with Kirby following. I basically synopsized that. You may notice there's 4 Kirbys in the picture, and that's because when Dark Meta Knight hit them, it somehow split them into... It's somehow split into 4 Kirbys. Which you'd think would just make things worse for the bad guys, so ironically, having played the game again recently, I did notice the Kirbys are actually weaker than usual. You only have like 5 hits before you die for one thing. And some of your abilities are not as good as they used to be, for instance, even like Superstar, which came before this one. For instance, there's in particular a fire ability, but also a burning ability that's separate from that. Whereas more recently, the 2 are conjoined into one ability. So... combined into one ability. So basically, he's been weakened by being split into 4 like that. Anyway, as for what's happening at that particular point, just to give more clarification, basically Meta Knight flew in to stop whatever's happening in the mirror world, Dark Meta Knight beat him, then sealed him in another mirror, shattered it so he can't get out, and that's when the Kirbys came involved, basically, and put the mirror back together to save Meta Knight. So yeah, he was trying to capture Meta Knight in that mirror, replace him essentially, and then carry out his master's orders to take over the world and stuff, getting rid of one of the people protecting it. Kirby eventually faced down the evil entity behind all this called Dark Mind. He's the one who crafted Dark Meta Knight, which is from the real Knight's reflection using his mirror powers. And he has a lot of qualities from previous villains, so maybe a natural mirror world counterpart to them. Because while there are shadowy versions of them like Dark Meta Knight and Shadow Kirby, or Shadow Deity from this game, there is actual, like, just counterparts in the mirror world as well, like reflections of the other version, essentially, that aren't necessarily brought about evil magic, they just sorta exist. And it's my speculation that Dark Mind's one of those. He's a counterpart to some other Kirby villain, and basically is their counterpart in this world as opposed to the other one. As for Shadow Kirby, I actually forget to talk about him in this slide entirely, or rather this presentation entirely, but you did see him earlier in the stream in like the Kirby Fires 2 thing where he just fights Kirby, but the thing is, I don't think that was like a serious battle. I think you were just playing around myself, because I recall seeing some lore describing what he thinks of as a battle as just a prank you play on someone. So him just attacking someone is just a prank, I guess, in his eyes. He's not a good person exactly, but he's not straight evil either. And an Amazing Mirror, I should point out, he actually helped Kirby. So then I'll talk about Dark Mind's different components, and the first one is Nightmare from Nightmare and Dreamland, which was also the second Kirby game overall. He He gets a lot of visual elements from nightmares, you may notice, like having a vaguely humanoid appearance, having a dark cloak that obscures them human features, and having star-shaped attacks. They both fire out stars of different colors at you, for instance. Nightmares are mostly white, while Dark Minds were changing colors constantly. How do you make Kirby evil? Well, Shadow Kirby wasn't really evil, that's the thing. He's more just mischievous, or I think he's kind of cowardly, perhaps, because he never actually fights Dark Mind himself. He just sort of throws you a power-up and that's it. But, I think he, still wants to do good, more or less, but he's not as overtly good. Or maybe he's just reflecting Kirby in a different way. He's not a worse person, but he has different priorities, perhaps. Either way, that's all pretty vague. That's just my speculation. So Nightmare gives Dark Mind a lot of his physical qualities, like the inhuman... vague humanoid shape, the cloak, the inhuman stuff under the cloak, and his star-shaped attacks. But other than that, they don't have a lot in common. Because Nightmare doesn't have a lot of personality to him. He basically is just a literal nightmare. He exists to corrupt the dreams of other people and do that and everything, and that was all there was to him. However, his second component is Zero. They have a lot less appearance-wise in common, but Zero is a giant eyeball, just like his Dark Mind has in the center of his body. So they do look like very different eyeballs, still. Dark Minds look more like Sauron or something from the movies. But anyway, when you fight Dark Mind's second form, he is just a giant eyeball, implying that's his core, that's his true essence, and the humanoid part was basically like a guise or protection from that. And they both have clear plans and intents, unlike Nightmare. Zero is spreading his darkness over Dreamland to possess people and make them serve his will, whereas Dark Mind was creating copies of Meta Knight to serve his will instead, and basically replace the other people in mirrors and stuff. So basically they're both trying to corrupt things in Dreamland and take over, essentially, just through different means. But the actual goal is the same. So you could say Nightmare is his exterior while Zero is his interior, essentially. And there's Shadow Kirby, my one picture of him I got, where he's throwing out the sword for you. So now from his own shadow copy of Meta Knight's own sword, Kirby did defeat Dark Mind after a long battle. So yeah, if you ever lose a Dark Mind, Shadow Kirby will throw the sword to you when you start the battle again, so you have it to start with, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get it back. Anyway, the Dark Mind once defeated, his influence is not entirely gone. So this is Dark Meta Knight, his former minion. Though he was seemingly destroyed before Kirby fought Dark Mind, he wasn't really dead. He's sort of shattered, look like. Sort of like a Shadow Deity did, and he did here in this game as well, in Triple Deluxe. Which implies, I guess, neither of them were actually dead, perhaps? Anyway, so he clearly was still around by the point of Triple Deluxe. Apparently he'd been sealed inside the mirror to the point, and he was so weak he couldn't leave it like he did before. Dark Meta Knight was so consumed by thoughts of Revenger's defeat and with Sectonia staring in the mirror for so long, the malice coming off it destroyed her mind. As detailed in his boss info here, where it says, he's back with a vengeance, the darkest shadow of the strongest warrior. Sealed in the labyrinth of the mirror for aeons, this Dark Knight has returned with one thing on his mind: revenge. And the labyrinth is actually a reference to Amazing Mirror's Japanese name, which was the Great Labyrinth of the Mirror. And if the description is being honest about being trapped for aeons, there's no telling how long his malice has corrupted the mirror for before Sectonia found it, or while she had it, because we don't know how long she's lived either. I didn't actually bring it up, but there is some later info from another game that references that her DNA or whatever is at least 1,000 years old or something. So either it's a combination of all the entities she's possessed over time, or she's just lived for 1,000 years. We don't know which it is. But it also says he's been trapped in the mirror for aeons, so the time between Amazing Mirror and Triple Deluxe is literal hundreds or thousands of years, which implies Kirby's that old too, and everyone else as well. I don't know, maybe they just don't age. I don't know, it's weird to think about, but it says he's been in there that long, so I'll trust it. This is the lore. This is like the canon lore that he's been there that long, so I don't have anything to do but believe it, I suppose. It sure is crazy, though. Either way, basically, Sectonia's worst tendencies are brought out by staring in the mirror, which was reflecting Dark Meta Knight's malice the entire time. I don't think he was necessarily intentionally distorting her mind or anything, or even aware she was there, but just being near each other was doing that, apparently. And getting back to Triple Deluxe proper, another doppelganger also appeared in the game, Shadow Deity. There isn't much to say about him, but he seems really angry and has some strange powers. In particular, his stomach can open up to turn into a giant maw that fires blasts of energy. This seems to be referencing when Dedede is possessed by dark matter from Dreamland 2 and 3, I believe. Well, actually, in Kirby 64 was possessed all 3 times, and they all did the belly mouth thing. Maybe time moves faster in the mirror? That's possible, that's certainly possible. Regardless, Dedede's been possessed at least 3 times, where it all did that distorted mouth thing in his chest, so yeah. The fact that Shadow Deity can do this too, could imply he's possessed, but I don't think so. Because see, when Dedede was possessed, it's hard to tell from that one picture, but basically he seemed to be sleepwalking the entire time. His eyes were closed. He didn't seem active, he didn't seem aware of what's going on. So basically, Dark Matter was possessing him while he was asleep and using his body like a puppet. Shadow Deity, while he does have blank eyes, his eyes are wide open, and he is screaming the entire time you fight him, essentially. Or at least grunting. So it's pretty implicit that he's awake. So what I think it is that Shadow Deity was a reflection of Dedede's evil inside. And it even says on his boss tech that texted, in the depths of the mysterious mirror hanging in the hall of the Queen waits the Dark King, Shadow Deity. He wages battle against all comers, but his true opponent is the darkness in his own heart, which is slightly misleading. The original Japanese makes clear Shadow Deity basically is Dedede's inner darkness. He's a representation of the worst he could possibly be, essentially. His rage and anger at other things, lashing out at other stuff that infuriates him. But it also includes when he was possessed, apparently, given the whole shadow maw on his chest thing. So what I'm thinking is basically, it's a representation of him when he was possessed and also him at his angry. It's all wrapped up in one. So yeah, that's basically what Shadow Deity is, pretty simply. It is crazy to think about. Basically just Dedede looking in the mirror produces a shadowy copy that represents his inner evil, and it just appeared out of nowhere and didn't exist before then, as best I can tell. However, there is something else to bring up. Another villain that looks a lot like Shadow Deity. He was destroyed in his only appearance. A very similar entity later appeared in Team Kirby Clash Deluxe called King D-Mind, who looks a lot like Shadow Deity, as you can see, but he had different helmets and colors and a brighter yellow eyes. You may recognize the helmet from when I showed you Dark Mind earlier. It's the exact same one, and the name should make it pretty clear they're essentially the same thing. And that game, a mirror copy of Taranza appeared, Dark Taranza, who was unleashing monsters on the land. Kirby eventually backed him in the corner and he called out for help through that mirror. He used a dark version that looks like the dimensional mirror, but little is known about this copy, necessarily. We do know that Dark Taranza is more when normal Taranza looked into that same mirror, reflecting his own darker aspects, so that's where all these dark copies come from. Just them looking in the mirror is enough to produce a shadowy, distorted version of themselves. You may also notice Taranza has like bee theming to his colors and everything. He even has a little stinger on the bottom. I think that's implying he's sort of becoming more like Sectonia and stuff and everything, but I'm not sure. It's not like we see them very often, or very long rather. They only show up in that one game. All we do know is that Dark Taranza is evil, that he's working for King D-Mind and summons him to help fight you, and that's about it, really. So yeah, he summons King D-Mind, basically, to help him against Kirby and everything, but he is no more forgiving a failure than Sectonia was. And he's destroyed before he moves on to fight Kirby, just smashes his hammer and he shatters like a mirror. We can infer from all that Dark Taranza is working for King D-Mind, but we don't know much else about him other than he was certainly evil and planning to take over via the monsters Dark Taranza was summoning to spread his influence and stuff. Essentially, he's using magic to create stronger monsters and corrupt them toward evil purposes and things. But that's about it for that. As for King D-Mind himself, he fights exactly like Shadow Deity, but as the fight drags on, he splits open his body and reveal a familiar-looking eyeball. It's not exactly like Dark Mind's was, that one was red and this one's purple, but it does have the exact same skill and pupil and everything, and otherwise it also does this big fancy laser attack. So from all that, you can definitely infer that it's the same entity, or at least something very similar to it. So this likely means that it is Dark Mind perhaps possessing Shadow Deity, or maybe they're the same entity or they fuse or something. It's a little hard to tell. They're definitely something similar for sure. Anyway, so that's all the extra Kirby lore. Now we're moving back to the main game. But just to recap, just for Matthew's sake here, geez, that's a lot. Sectonia is corrupted by looking in this mirror. The mirror itself connects to a mirror world, where Kirby once fought an evil guy who was essentially some sort of counterpart to Nightmare Zero, and seek to control Dreamland through replacing people with mirror copies of themselves. His minion Dark Meta Knight was sealed inside the mirror, and his malice was leading out through it. He was apparently sealed for aeons, possibly at least 1,000 years, and with Sectonia looking in the mirror for so long, it destroyed her mind for due to his malice leaking out of it, which made her essentially turn evil and be obsessed with beauty and stuff. I then talked about Shadow Deity who showed up in the game, him being a reflection of Deity's worst aspects, and also dark matter, just because. Since that was when he was possessed and everything, and he does some similar moves to that, so it implies they're the same sort of thing. And then I talked about King D-Mind, who's clearly Shadow Deity, but also Dark Mind at the same time. Possibly the two villains fused together, or one possessing the other. Who showed up in a side game once. So, yeah. And now, with all that out of the way, all the stuff connected to Amazing Mirror out of the way finally, we come back to the main game, which is the rest of it. So Sectonia is defeated, but she refuses to give up and uses her abilities, which lets her possess other creatures, to possess the giant dream stalk that was rising out of the ground and everything. Taking on new more powerful forms, she literally makes it spread across the entire planet to choke the world in vines, so she can devour everything and absorb it. And the game does explain how she can do that. When you're fighting those eyeball vines before the actual final battle, it explains that she's a parasitic species that survives by leeching power from her life form, so weak enough to be controlled. The people of Sky and King Dedede decide to fight back in order to save the planet from the evil queen. So yeah, this is something her and Taranza both can do. It's just something their spire-like species can do. For instance, when Taranza kidnapped Dedede, she trapped him in a magic net, which seemed to just drain his power because he never once struggled to get out the entire time. But instead of just controlling or manipulating something else to fight for him, Sectonia's power can go beyond that to the point of taking over the body of other people. So that's what she did with to get the wasp eye she has now, and what she's doing now to take over the Dreamstalk and become a giant plant, bee, monster thing. So her obsession with beauty was amplified by the mirror for so long she possessed others to take their beauty as her own. Now she takes over the Dreamstalk to drain the world of everything other than just herself, because everything else is lesser than herself. And Kirby nearly defeats her, but she eventually traps in that vine due to his stubby little limbs. There's nothing he can do to escape, unfortunately. He actually calls for help, and Taranza, realizing his queen needs to be stopped, despite being friends before, we realize she's basically gone mad with power and she's trying to devour the planet. Yeah, that's kind of a turning point there. So yeah, he flies Dedede over, he smacks Kirby out of the vine, and I help save him. He also brings in a miracle fruit which he feeds to Kirby so he can take him to hypernova form and suck up Sectonia's laser and fire it back at her. And so they save the world. Sectonia is defeated, everything's back to normal, everything is good. And that's all for my Kirby lecture right now. That's all I got. That's all the lore for this game. There are some I could have dived into, of course, but I think that's probably enough for now. My mouth is getting tired of talking, so I will just stop it there for now. So yeah, I hope that was informative. I hope it was interesting. I hope it at least wasn't boring. I do hope it wasn't boring. I guess, any questions or anything? Yes, this is a PowerPoint I made. No. I did this. I made all of this. I made this. I got the pictures. I, wrote all this down. 46 slides, to be exact. I'm glad you liked it. Did any of you have any questions or anything? Or should we just, end the stream there? Thank you for head pats. Probably don't have any questions, I imagine, but alright, I'll stretch as well. Thank you. Thank you for head pats and hydrates and stretches. Will I do more PowerPoints? Yes, I believe I will, actually. I rather enjoy doing this, and if you guys enjoyed it too, then I'll keep doing it. Yeah, why not? Does any of this tie into Squeak Squad? Actually, no. No, it does not. However, I can tie things into Squeak Squad for sure. I can decidedly do that, in fact. So, I could do a discussion on that, or at least parts of it, certainly. I can only think of 2 things off the top of my head that directly relate to any other games in particular, but I could easily imagine, that'd be enough to talk about in some ways. All of Kingdom Hearts, oh god. I mean, I could, but honestly, I just find it a lot less interesting than Kirby lore, if you ask me. I just find it less interesting, intrinsically. I feel like the Kirby lore is a lot more tight-knit and interesting to delve into, in my opinion. Like, Kingdom Hearts does a lot more explaining and talky about it, so I don't really need to go over it as much, you know? And there is a lot of it, but also not that much, weirdly. Like, I don't know. I feel like I could literally explain all of Kingdom Hearts in just the same amount of time it took to explain this one game and everything connected to it, so, you know, I don't know. But yeah, just play the games. They're good to play. The lore is good to a point. I feel like they kind of dropped the ball later on, especially in 3. Just, the third one. The third one was... I have legitimate grievances and hate for the third Kingdom Hearts game. Or aka the latest. Well, not latest at this point, actually. They made a stupid rhythm game after that, but you get the idea. If you play games that already came out, you're good? Yeah, exactly. See, that's all you need. That's all you need to understand. Kirby lore, though, is a little hidden. You can connect things together. There are connections you can make and secret things you can find out and stuff like that. And it's neat. It's just neat. I like it. It makes me happy. I feel enthused to talk about it. So, yeah. Final Fantasy Golden Sun blows Kingdom Hearts out of the water. I would agree with that. Like, I mean, there isn't as much lore there. At least with Final Golden Sun, I don't think. Though I've only played the first one, so eh. As for Final Fantasy, I feel like the games don't really interconnect the same way, though I imagine you have plenty to say about that, Matthew, given you talk about 16 so much. But, regardless, that's all for the Kirby lore for now. Yeah, that'll do for the stream and everything. Hope you enjoyed my TED Talk or whatever.